So we have someone running around with a microphone. If you have a question, make sure that he is there before you speak so we can get it recorded for the web. So there was a question earlier from Greg's session. You want to ask that now?
I would like to ask another question first, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, so regarding concatenated audio that you were speaking about just now, I know production music libraries are the bane of our existence a lot of the times, but do you see any potential in perhaps a set of music, in short snippets that are related in key, related in layers and things like that as a possible product for independent developers who may not place such a great priority on music but still need to have something there and the kind of interactivity to allow the game to remain immersive?
I'm going to say my impulse is to say no, but then again, you never know what anything's like 2 years from now. But it's such an esoteric practice to make work. I wouldn't even know how to do a preset pool for people to put that together. And the example I gave you was really crude and primitive. If you look at that tutorial that I had online, it gets nuts. It gets really granular and really micro level, which is where the fluidity comes from. But the idea of putting that in a pool, I think, would just be really off-putting. I don't know what people would know what to do with it, which means they'd have to hire me or some of the other lovely people on this panel to do it. So, yeah, I couldn't see that happening, really. But who knows?
And the other question I had for Greg was, you mentioned that sales for the music label were not so good. But I've noticed that there's a great deal of fan response nowadays in areas of music that are retro related, and a huge number of people are willing to buy or at least download for free. There's enough interest for them to actually want to have these things, even if they don't want to pay for them. So, have you noticed? Are there any other labels that you are familiar with doing what you're doing? Putting the game soundtracks out for sale that are more successful than what you might see in other games that are not retro?
Yeah, I understand your question. I think you're saying is the retro niche possibly something that's more popular? Could be. I'm not aware of any that I could comment on, but if you're seeing that, then that could be the case.
I know one example of that. I mentioned PopCap when you were talking about that. PopCap now for Plants vs. Zombies, for each version now they have a K-pop or J-pop band do like an original pop song. It's completely blatant. Then they put that in there, and then they have that available on iTunes, right? So it's just, I don't think that's a big money maker for them, but it is sort of a cross-referencing thing. But in that instance, it's just tacking on a pop song into the game, knowing that they already have an audience.
And also, I think it taps into what Greg said about immersion. And if I'm a big fan of, one of the Kabam games and I want to download the music, it just makes me more immersed, and I'm really more likely to spend money in the game just because that soundtrack is available and I'm kind of living that soundtrack. So it's not necessarily just about the download money that you're getting. It's the whole kind of branding.
Yes, I was mainly asking about just the label. But I've also realized that immersive music is frequently not the best kind of music to listen to on its own, right? So I mean, people generally, I guess, they don't buy that. But thank you for your answers.
I think this mic works. Yeah. So at the risk of stepping on some toes, although I appreciate you wanting to bring a lot of attention to audio and music, like that's what us in audio production have been saying for decades now. Well, the older folks at least. I think it's unfortunate that so few people have turned out to this, so that I don't know why that is, but that's, obviously that'd be great if more people were physically present. Yeah. But my question is about, since there are so few of us, I feel like I can ask a pretty personal question here. I'm a music composer, and I'm wondering what your tips are for a music composer interested in getting into the tech scene, if you will, ways to get that door open, because I've found that initial door is pretty difficult to get in. What I understand is that, once it's rolling, okay, that's good. But what are just some of your tips in terms of this changing landscape that's changing virtually every day? Where is some good positioning that you've seen?
I'd say number one is your relationships with people. I've seen a lot of people come in and have demo discs and USB drives and all sorts of things. In general, these are not listened to. And, people want to be polite and helpful and take your demo and all of that, but it's like everyone's busy. So really it's about coming to conferences like this and making, a lot of acquaintances and getting to know people, because this industry is pretty small, and someone who is like an accountant or a receptionist may later be a producer at another company. And since I've been coming to Casual Connect, every single Casual Connect since the first one in Amsterdam, I've actually seen all of this happen. And so I think that's just number one. And it takes a lot of time. And for me, I always wanted to do what I'm doing right now. And I freelanced from 1999 to 2007 until I made it full time. So that's how long it takes. Maybe some people could be faster, it just takes a long time, and you have to really want what you're doing and make the right connections.
I'd say another way of doing it is not the most glamorous way of doing it, but I've seen a lot of people since I've been in-house most of the last 14 years. One of the ways is people, and this applies to artists, this applies to game designers as well as audio guys, just getting a job doing something in a game company and working your way up. I know it seems like, it's going to take a long time, but it actually works. And I'm working, I have colleagues that are working in the games industry now who, they started out doing Q&A, and now they're, producers, or they're, game designers, that sort of thing. So I think a lot of it has to do with, rubbing elbows with the right people and just getting in where you can sometimes.
I would add to that, just be a nice person, which sounds lame, but Aaron's right to the extent that you kind of just have to be, like, events like this are great. My first video game gig was for PlayStation 2, localizing a ton of Japanese to English, which is pretty complicated. They didn't know anything about me. I was just talking to Jesse about this, but I knew a composer that worked with them. They didn't want anything about demos. They didn't want to know my resumes. They just called me up, and Matt, who's my friend, I was on a thing called the Seattle Composers Alliance, which is a great thing if you're in Seattle. I think it's still around. Where it's all commercial composers. I was the events guy. He just knew I was reliable. I made things happen, and I get things done on time. That was enough. They didn't really ask. Like I was telling Jesse, I could be a serial killer for all they know. But I was decent. I showed up on time, and that got me the gig. But I've never gotten anything from a demo, ever, in my entire life.
I took mine down. I did. I took it down.
I could speak to that a little bit. I have a friend who had an approach that always used to amaze me, and it really worked well. He was a great composer, and he's also a great sound designer. He loved both, loved doing both. But whenever it came to promoting himself, he would promote himself as a sound designer. Didn't even bother to talk about composing. And it worked for him because he wasn't being disingenuous. He loved sound design. But there was more opportunity there. And then every time he got a gig doing sound design, it would sooner or later, he'd be composing at the same place. Just because he's already there, and it just kind of happens, So.
That's also a good point, because I know a lot of people over the course of the last 15 years, they talk about, I write music and I'm a composer, and that they address that first. And in this day and age, in terms of game development, it's like you really have to wear a lot of different hats, and so you have to be well versed and offer that as a service.
Yeah, I know very few people who just do game music composition. Almost every pro I know in this industry will do sound design and voiceover recording and all sorts of different things.
And just to, would you add the implementation? Would that be a sort of a central aspect of that?
Well, the more you can do, the more valuable you are. I know that more and more implementation is becoming a reality. I mean, I work at Kabam as a contractor, and I do implementation. And anything that I didn't know how to do, I had to learn how to do. So I think it's definitely an important skill.
Yeah, I don't need to hire any composers. But whenever I do have need, it's need for people to help with the implementation and with the sound design. And if you're going to be a composer as a niche and just focus on that, that's fine. But then game audio is just going to be one of your avenues. You're also going to be reaching out to TV and film and everything else as well.
Great question, though. And as far as people not turning up, turn up next year, all of you.
Hey, we're small, but we're mighty.
I initially wanted to ask about what your guys' favorite middleware was, but I have a question that I'm more interested in, which is your favorite sound effect that you've ever heard in a game, and why you liked it that much.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, in general, I'm going to say my favorite sound effects as a gamer have been voiceover related, actually. I love when voiceovers interact with the character, like when you tap on the character and she's like, "Hi, how are you? Oh my goodness," or whatever she says. And it's different every time. Or like in battle, like, "Eat my flames," or like, "Burn," or like, "Ouch, it's hot in here," or whatever. And if it's different every time, to me, that's so like entertaining. I just want to click on her and like not stop like experiencing that. So for me, sound effects that are dynamic and have variables are really interesting. Things that are the same thing every time are like, I'm bored of that.
I'm not answering your question directly, but I'm going to say something opposite. There is something that I made for, it was for a digital alarm app. It was a guy that did a lot of artwork that looked like Petit Mondrian. He was trying to do new ways of looking at a clock face. It's a really interesting gig to get. And so all of my alarms had to be very odd and abstract and not what you thought would be alarms. And there's one I did called Stretch Plink, which is what I called it, which I did an absinthe with, if you know, that's heavy on modulation, about movement. And I don't know how to describe it. It just sounds like a digital caterpillar sort of doing this. And I've done the opposite. I got that, and then I actually, because it was such a low-money gig, I maintained the ownership to it. I'm trying to find games in which to put that in. So it's not really my favorite, but I just needs to live somewhere else better. It's like I got this thing, and so it's still hanging out. But that's my own. I wasn't necessarily answering your question about what I've heard from someone else.
Well, I have two answers for you. One, the sound that comes to mind for me that I really love, and it's not really in a game specifically, but it's in Logic, and it's called Marble on a Journey.
Wow. Oh, yeah.
You guys hip to that?
I don't know that. What's that module, the plugin?
It's in Sculpture. And it's just the coolest little sound, and it just sounds like a marble rolling down, going on a journey. I've used it in tons of things. I love that sound.
It's your Wilhelm scream.
And you can blend it. You can blend it into things and give it so much
Sir,
texture.
I'm with Logic, and come with me.
But I think for me, sound design and my inspiration for sound really came from radio. When I listened to the radio and I would hear the way they would put together these soundscapes along with their announcements and all the little stuff in between, and it would just go boom, boom, but it would just blew me away how much impact it had, and it was all audio. You know. So.
My favorite sound, I was thinking about this, and I was trying to figure out, have I created anything that's signature? And 3 years ago, I started contracting for Double Down Interactive, working on the Double Down Casino. And it was the first time that I had done any casino audio, and I just went headfirst into it and was making slot stops and reel spins and stingers and all that kind of stuff. And at that period of time, before they were acquired by IGT, we were pumping out like 2 games a month on average, and I was just sitting there hammering out, like lots and lots of audio. And I mean, pretty much for the most part, reel spins are just like I mean, I'm sure everybody here has been to Las Vegas, and you hear the. So, I was getting to do a Christmas skin, and I was trying to figure out, like, how to, because bells are Christmassy and they're really annoying too, because they really, they mess with my ears too. The bells do. But I created this reel spin that is the sexiest reel spin that I've ever heard in my entire life. Wow. And so when I used it, and it worked so well in that Christmas theme that I was just like, fuck it, I'm going to put this in all of the games that I possibly can. If it's not thematic, if it's not really heavily thematic, I'm going to put this in there. And so I started putting it in there, and it became the signature reel sound for a lot of the Double Down interactive casino games. And then they started using it at in the stingers of their at the end of their like commercials and online radio spots and stuff like that. So it'd like pop up Double Down and go. It was just so that's my favorite sound that I've ever created, and I think about it all the time.
Was it a buyout?
I was in-house, so everything I did was
Yes, if it was a buyout.
yeah.
Wah, wah. You could be rich.
How do you know I'm not?
Hi guys. So we're very interested in tools and tech. That's what my company does. So I'd be really interested in hearing from you guys what the biggest single problem is that each of you face in your current jobs, or the largest annoyance or the biggest problem that you guys see that you have to address over the next 12 months.
For me, it's always, I mean, some companies do this really well, but with a lot of clients, it's the whole getting a build and being able to test my sounds in that build on my device. That's just always the problem for me.
For me, I work in HTML5 games only right now. No longer doing native games or downloadables or anything like that. So HTML5 limitations is a big challenge. It's nice to see the web audio API starting to be expressed in a lot of different browsers, and it's becoming more robust, and that's really great. But one of the things that Greg mentioned earlier about throwing it was just static audio. I mean, there really isn't a lot of things that you can do programmatically right now with the web audio API and HTML5. So for me, I'm having to try it and design and devise new ways of expressing audio within all of those limitations of HTML5. I still believe in it, and I just hope the world catches up and it starts becoming more robust and new tools are being designed and that sort of thing. Because it just even a year ago, there were some platforms that could only play one sound at a time, and so I had to use audio sprites, which I don't know if you know what audio sprites are, but they're horrendous little creatures, and they're not very they're very limiting, right? So in the course of the last, I'm going to say 9 months, I've seen a lot of changes in terms of HTML5 development, which is great, because I think it's it's going to even be better in another year. I just hope that it gets embraced more. So those are my.
I think the biggest challenge, and it's not just for audio, it's for mobile games in general, is delivering really rich content within the limitations of the device and the bandwidth that we have now. So that's the big challenge, and the companies that are figuring that out, I think, are the ones that are going to emerge.
Yeah, I agree. I second the senator's speech there.
Good question.
We do audio tech for games. So, for example, we do codecs. We write sound engines, mostly coming from the console side. But recently, we did a tool that permits you to synthesize new audio tech. So, for example, you can put in a few sounds, and it synthesizes an array of gun sounds or impact sounds, that sort of thing. Mhm.
All right. Any more questions? We have time for one or two more, and then we're going to go have a cocktail.
What's your guys' favorite audio middleware that you just love to use? Or DAW for it?
Well, the one that I use for work is Fabric, so I guess it's my favorite.
Yeah, we're using Fabric at Kabam, and it's working really well. It's not perfect, but the developer is really responsive and helps us get through the rough spots. There's another one called Master Audio, which is looking really good too. And of course, Unity 5 is going to have a lot more audio power under the hood as well.
It sure is a step above throwing it over the fence, like what Greg mentioned in his talk. I mean, I've been contracting for audio for a long time in the industry, and almost everyone you just throw it over and they write you a check, say thanks, and then you get the game and they've normalized everything. So like some little whisper sound is like, you know, I don't want to do that to this mic. It deserves better, but you know, and they maybe don't use all my sounds that I send, or they don't implement them the way I wanted. And so it's nice to work in Fabric and be able to select like 5 random sounds, or to do all the different dynamic things that I can do creatively. It's just really awesome. And I think as we move forward, there's going to be more and more of that. It's going to be more available and easier.
I would just, this doesn't really address your question earlier, but in terms of my experience working in-house at Gamehouse and Double Down and now at Absolute Hero, I can definitely say that even though I'm not a developer, having a rudimentary understanding of the code that they're working with is really, really important, because just as they should really have a rudimentary understanding of what you do, so that they can talk to you on terms of audio, they can talk to you about timbre and tempo and just all sorts of different things. You really should be able to talk to them in terms of code. You should really have just a basic understanding of what it is that makes the game go. I think it's really important.
All right. I think we have time for one more question, if there is one.
Hey, so for mobile games, if you're just tossing your files over the fence, is there best practices for delivering them at certain decibel levels for like UI or foreground sounds or background music?
Well, what I often do is look at what their previous games did to try to see, like if I'm working with a client, I'm seeing how loud their assets are. If you can't get your hands on that, then I would probably deliver around like -3 dB or -6 dB, whatever, not blown out of proportion. Because some middleware can only make things quieter and not louder, and so that's just a consideration.
I recently discovered a plugin for the Mac OS, and I forget the name. I think it's like $4 or $5. And basically, it works with your audio, the sound card of your Mac. And basically, it allows you to take virtual inputs of your browser and run it through these meters, so you can get an idea of like where things are playing. It was really helpful, because I was sitting here going, it's like, well, what are some of these people, what are their levels set at? I mean, there really is no standard other than what he sort of mentioned, at -3 dB, which I think is, even when I was working at a post house back in the late 90s, that was pretty much a standard. But I was going through and using this thing, and it was really interesting, because most of the music in a lot of games I was playing was coming in at like minus 10 and minus 12 dB, and then the sound effects were all up in that upper range. And it was even like really loud pieces of music you would think that was like, this has got to be just like, it was still like down in that range in that area. So it was a really interesting tool. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it. What's it called? I forget the name of it, but I actually play games all the time, and I run it through that filter to see just exactly where their levels are set and that sort of thing.
You know, it reminds me of a little experience I had when I first started working at Kabam. One of the engineers on one of the games kept saying, these sounds are too loud. They're too loud. And I'm like, well, I'm not making them loud. I'm not like cranking them up. They're just, the same way I always deliver sounds. And I was also thinking, now, why does he think they're too loud? What's going on? So I went and sat down and talked to him. And I realized what he was doing is what a lot of users do. He's got the browser open, and this was a web game, and he's got a whole bunch of tabs. And he's doing this, that, and the other thing, and going bouncing between tabs. And that was his point of reference, was the kind of average of where everything else was audio-wise from all his other tabs that he had open. And I went, oh my God, I never considered the environment of a browser with lots of tabs and lots of audio happening.
And how can you mitigate that?
And how do you mitigate that? So that was kind of an eye-opener. Now you mentioned you normalize everything to minus 1 dB
I'm
or
actually
1.5?
minus 1 or minus 1.5, but that's also coming from a guy who well, a part of that, my presentation was about how for my composition and my sound design for mobile has gotten to a certain point that by the time I get to that mastering stage, it's almost just making sure things aren't clipping. So it's not really brick walled against that 0.1 or that negative 1.5. It's kind of already where it needs to be to begin with. But this sounds fascinating, actually. The plugin that you're talking about. But to answer your original question, you were talking about where do you put levels at it for a throw it over the fence client. I don't take that client. I'm at the point where I'm also someone that creates games. I've created board games. I created live games too. I present myself to clients as someone that I like to be there early on. I like to be there for play testing because there's audio solutions a lot of times to game issues. I've even solved math issues sometimes being there in the room. So if it's going to be one of these things where I just give it to them, they do whatever, I just don't even take that client anymore. I mean, I guess I'm in a position where I can, but to me that's a red flag at this point in time. I think that most people, I'll say something nice about clients, which dovetails off of what you said. I think at this point in time, everyone's pretty savvy. Like everyone has to be a polymath, including the producers, including the people that 10 years ago used to be a little stupid about things, and you had to educate them. Now they all know how to do, Creative Suite. Now they know a bit of code, and you should. And so I find that most of them are savvy enough that situation doesn't come up as much anymore. At least it doesn't for me. You guys might get clients where that's the case, but the teams are better now, I think.
Another thing you can do is help educate your clients too. And a lot of times you'll get a client like that, and I have to say to them, hey, I don't want you to listen to each of these sounds individually and tell me which one is loud and soft. What I want to do is play it in the build. And if we're not to that point yet where it's implemented, that's fine, because I can put it in my DAW, I can play the music, and I can play all the sound effects like Jesse's presentation and record some of that, video capture that, and send them every single sound effect that happens in that area. And then they're going to see why you're doing what you're doing. It will only waste your time if you throw it over the fence and ask for their feedback. Trust me. All right.
There's nothing more rude than when a developer listens to individual sound effects. There's nothing more rude and disturbing than when a developer listens to individual sound effects and makes judgment calls based on that one sound effect, because they're not designed that way. They're, as far as I've ever experienced, maybe when I was, just a baby designer back in the late 90s, early 2000s, maybe I would have done something like that, but never again.
That brings to mind another early Kabam story. And when I look at this stuff and think about it, it blows me away how far we've come in just 3 short years. But I remember one of the first sound sets I brought to the game team when I was hired at Kabam. And what they did was our offices were just rows and rows of tables and computers, like the way companies are now, in a giant room. And the din of that room was just loud, really loud. And so I bring the sounds over, they said, let's put them on the engineer's machine, we'll huddle around his machine and listen. And so me and the producer and the engineer and a couple other people were listening, and some of the sounds were rollovers, UI sounds, button clicks and rollovers. Real subtle little things. And well, we can't hear it, crank it up. So you take the rollover sound, you crank it up to full blast, and it sounds horrible. And I'm thinking, oh, this is just crazy what we're doing here. There's no perspective. There's no perspective on this stuff at all. So, I put in some policies after that and came up with some creative ways to demo stuff to them in context rather than just have them go through sounds one at a time like that, because that gets you nowhere.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions, I just want to thank all the speakers we had today at the audio track. It was great to see some new faces as well. And tell everyone about the audio track so that next year, because we do it every year, you can get more people here. And definitely people watch online, so send the links around. And thanks a lot to Casual Connect. And thanks a lot to Orchid. Is she back there still? She was helping out today in the room. Thanks so much.